Welcome to M2TechCast, a live internet radio show offering the latest news and interviews with the people driving business, technology, and politics in Michigan. Now, your hosts, Matt Roush and Mike Brennan.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And it's Monday at 2, and that means it's time for another M2TechCast at mitechnews.tv.
And we have a repeat offender with us today. We have Dan Lorman, who is, prior to us changing the format to focus more on COVID, was with us on a pretty much monthly basis, sometimes pairing up with Richard Steenan. And boy, that really scared the pants off us. So, so what we're going to talk about today is, look what we're doing right now. Everybody that can, not everybody, many people who can, are working from home. And that's wonderful, but it does pose cybersecurity threats if you don't do certain things, right, Dan?
Absolutely, guys. It's great to be with you again. And it's an important topic. So, I mean, it's widespread. People working from home, and we're going to go over the tips on what people should be thinking about when they're doing that.
All right. So why don't we kick it off with what in your mind? I know you have a list of them here right in front of me, but in your mind, what is the most important thing that someone that's working from home should do to protect themselves from letting the bad guys into the office network?
I think the first thing is really kind of understanding your situation. I mean, there's a bunch of tips. I give you my top tip, but I guess really, honestly, my number one tip is know what your company policy is, your government policy is, whoever you work for. What are the rules? You know, what are the policies, procedures? You know, is it a home PC that you own? Is it a work PC?
Kids playing on it?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people are using, they rushed home and they're still using their home PCs with that. So the challenge of, know what your baseline is. What are the rules, procedures, policies? I think that's the number one tip, and make sure you're following those. But then obviously 50% of people plus, when a lot of surveys were saying they're on their own. I'm not getting a lot of help from work. I'm not getting help from the help desk, isn't very helpful, et cetera. And so because of that, we're going to go through some of the tip specifics. But number one, I think know what the policies and procedures and policies are from your office.
All right. What about encryption? How do you go about doing that, making sure that the stuff is as protected as it can be?
So encryption end-to-end is absolutely, making sure that your PC, VPN, virtual private network, if you've got that, there's some free downloads you can use, again, using the one from the office, but making sure that your data, both at rest on your PC, and also the data in transit to and from work and different connections is encrypted. And there's a lot of good VPN products out there. Again, I would say a lot of companies are saying, use the one we give you from the office, use that. But there are some really good VPNs, products that you can download and use yourself. Again, email encryption, the same thing. Making sure that you have an email encryption product to make sure that you're doing business from home, that it's encrypted.
And of course, because sometimes bad things do happen, you want to make sure you back stuff up, right?
Absolutely. So backups, we all think about them, but there's some basic premise, maybe at the office, it's an automatic backup that happens. Maybe now you're using a home PC, maybe you're using a work PC, but it's not being backed up. So making sure that at a minimum, it's really not that hard. You can literally get simplest way, you get a USB drive for $5-7 now that are literally 30, 40, 50 gigs, and you can plug them in. And take at least those data files. I mean, some people say back up your whole desktop, but at least those data files, those important files you've got, make sure that they're backed up regularly and that you can restore them. A lot of people do the backups, but then they find out the backups actually are bad and they can't use them, which is a big challenge, right? So your ability to restore the backups as well, test that out if you can. But making sure you've got regular backups. And if you were to get ransomware or some other, some bad actor's going to encrypt your desktop, your data, then at least you've got a good backup you can use.
Yeah, I have one of those terabyte ones sitting on my desk. Plus, I use a service. I won't name it. I don't want to give them a free plug, but I use the online service as well, so I double back up. So
And you can back up to the web. Certainly you can back up to a cloud. A lot of good backups there. Yeah, I just say
Google Drive lets you store quite a bit, right? I mean, that's a pretty liberal one since it's free. So
absolutely,
free is good. Yes.
Yes. Well, and I've been working from home on and off, doing a fair amount of work from home since way back in 2001 when I first started at the radio station. And what I always did was just back up everything on my home machine and put it on some kind of drive and take it to the office, and then back up everything on my office machine and put it somewhere safe at home, figuring that both of those buildings aren't going to burn down on the same day, right?
Yeah.
They're
and the
one of
cloud
them might
helps
burn
with that
down,
as well. So.
but not both of them on the same day. So that's.
Yeah. Good move.
What about passwords? I mean, like, we've come a long way since the password being password or ABC 123 or something like that.
I think that's yours, isn't it, Matt? ABC 123. So
absolutely, passwords is I often give the people say that for the consumer side of things, whether it be your bank accounts, your email, whatever you're doing, really, you should be using two-factor authentication. And still, it's like it used to be 10%. I know we've talked about this on the show before. It used to be about 1 in 10 people would use two-factor authentication or two-step authentication, even for like Gmail, Facebook, different websites, that, social media websites, Twitter. But it's free, and I highly encourage you to use it. Two-factor is the best way to go, really, for all the things you're doing online. It's not that hard to do. I'm not going to explain the whole process now, but go online, look at whatever service you're using, every app you're using. But then when you do have those passwords, making sure that you don't reuse them from home and work, change them regularly. Make sure that, you're not using that, top 20 list, like is that 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or, password, test, that kind of thing. So those default passwords, really important, especially when you get an app. You get a home app for, we talked about Internet of Things. You get these devices. The first thing the bad guys look for is those default passwords that come out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I use both. I use two-factor authentication, and then I never use the same password twice. And I keep a little black book in my desk, because I can't remember some of them. You create them and you go, oh, darn, what was that? And so, and then of course, when you do forget, you just reset it, and so you got a fresh one, right? So,
yeah, that's been my de facto security system for some time now. I will forget a password and create a new one about once a week, it seems like. So, and they're all different. They're all some combination of, some place and some number and a name or something like that. I try to make them
and a lot of people really encourage, really these really complex passwords. They found that actually the better way to do it is pick a phrase like Michigan State, bingo or something. Put them in.
I wouldn't pick phrase. That would not be one of mine.
That may not be good. Whatever it might be, something you're going to remember. 3 words. Obviously, you don't want it to be too common, like Michigan State football, that kind of thing. I was thinking to say Michigan State football, but you can change some of the characters, an A to an @ symbol, that kind of thing, to add some complexity to it. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be just a phrase, which is longer, which can actually be more effective.
Yeah, I look at some of those suggested passwords when they want to help you out, and it's like, God, if I could never remember that. It's all these symbols and signs and this, that, and the other, and I don't think that's particularly useful. Of course, you can look it up, in your password where you save them when but at the same time. But software updates are really, really important. I mean, that seems to be where a lot of the vulnerabilities come in, particularly with big companies. Big companies are the worst at this, aren't they?
Absolutely. Software updates, for your desktop, for your phones, for your apps, making sure you've got the latest at the very basic level. I tell people, if you're using your home PCs and stuff, maybe they haven't got that update from McAfee or Symantec, Norton. A big tip that a lot of people don't know about is a lot of the ISPs offer free, and free is good, right? Free, basically Norton Home or McAfee security, basically to cover kind of the AV antivirus, but it does anti-malware, it looks at ransomware, those kinds of things. It looks at a lot of those common threats. and it comes with your bundle. You probably, many people who are listening probably already paying for that. So look for that free bundle. Make sure it's constantly getting updated. You have to keep those signatures updated, but then actually the software itself. So the software one, really should be updating your iPhones, that kind of thing as well. But also your computer apps, you're running the old version, you're not running the latest versions of your software. That's a big challenge.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, are you a fan of letting updates install automatically, or do you want the machine to notify you of specifically what's being updated?
Good lawyer answer. It depends.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, for me, certain things, I do let automatically run. There are certain apps that we're running, with our company, for example, and our headquarters out in California. I'm here in Michigan. Where we're running certain software where we only want to be able to update it after we know it's been tested. So it's kind of like, what's the sample size, right? How many people are doing this? What's your level of trust in the automatic updates? The other thing is, you do sometimes hear about, certain updates that are problematic, like don't apply this latest, patch Tuesday patch for this, system and stuff. And we'll get an urgent message from our system administration team saying, don't, go in and don't apply this patch. But by and large, we do automatic updates on a lot of our things. I think many viewers could benefit by just doing those automatic updates. There are times where that can run into problems, especially if it's mission critical kind of applications or processes that you may want to have more of a hands-on, manual approach.
Okay. Where can people go to get more of these kind of tips? I know that your Security Mentor offers a place for those, right?
Yeah, there's actually a web. I'll just mention to you guys. There's a link. I know, Mike, we can probably put it in the article or make it available to people at securitymentor.com. We put out a white paper which has a lot more detail, and this is kind of high level. Some of you are like, give me the nitty gritty. How do I make sure my Wi-Fi routers, got the latest updates, and it gives a lot of different tips in about 5 or 6 other categories. So, and you can just go to securitymentor.com, and it's a white paper called Transitioning to a Remote Workforce under White Papers. You can download it there for free. It's a great resource. I would just say, there's a lot of really good materials out there on the web on this. Is first came out in March. There wasn't a lot of good material out, but I just encourage people, take 1 or 2 practical steps, because a lot of people say I'm overwhelmed, it's too much. But a lot of these things are not that hard to do. Use the security built into the devices you've already got. People say, is my Wi-Fi router secure enough? Is this device secure enough? Are you even using the security? Are you even turning it on in those devices? So I would highly encourage you to take a look at those mission critical apps and make sure they're updated and that you're following those tips.
Okay, this is where you get to do the shameless plug now. So if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at GovCSO, GovCSO. You can link with me on LinkedIn. I'm linked with all you guys, and certainly reach out to me. I like to communicate. I write for Government Technology Magazine and CSO Magazine. At GovCSO on Twitter, or dlorman at securitymentor.com. Feel free to shoot me an email.
And we might mention that Dan worked for the state of Michigan for 20 years. 17,
National Security Agency for 6, and Lockheed Martin and Mantech in England for 7, with top secret installation base, and I can't tell you where it was.
Okay.
Who would we tell, right?
Exactly.
No, it's just us kids. Come on.
Okay.
It's all good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dan Lorman, former State Chief Information Security Officer, now with SecurityMentor.com. We'll be right back in just a minute with another segment of the M2TechCast. For right now, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And you're watching MITechNews.tv.
As a Lawrence Technological
Dan.
University graduate, you're not only
Thanks so much.
marketable, you're
Good to
worth
see you.
I'll put that link in your video when we produce
When it comes to graduate salary, LTU is in America's top 100. Be
Hey,
in value,
Gavin.
be more. At
Using your
LTU,
smartphone, I can
is
tell.
everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
Lawrence Technological University graduates earn a degree and a higher starting salary. In fact, when it comes to earning potential, the Brookings Institution ranks LTU 5th among U.S. colleges and universities. Be enriched. Be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
And we're back. It's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we've got another segment of the M2TechCast for you. Want to introduce Gavin Brown, Executive Director of the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association, to the show. Gavin, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on this Monday morning and afternoon. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So what we're going to be talking about is I got a news release last week that intrigued me, and that's why I contacted Gavin, is when you think of Michigan, you don't necessarily think of us as being a space state. But in this case, there's going to be a space state conference in Traverse City, hopefully, at the end of August, early September. And so that's what really caught my eye, because when we think of the auto state, we think of tourism, agriculture, but space. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association and why it's so big here in Michigan?
Thank you, Michael. I think what we're looking at in today's world is the rich history, and I say the rich history of Michigan in space, as well as in aerospace. A lot of folks don't know that a lot of the Atlas rockets were built by Chrysler at the beginning of the Gemini program, right there on Van Dyke. So as that moved away from our economy, what happened was the Cape Canaveral and California and a couple other states took over. What we have done is basically, under our auspices of Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association, focused on the space industry 2 years ago and what the most growing sector will be. And that is in low Earth orbit with satellites. So a lot of folks have been reading about Elon Musk's Starlink and SpaceX, as well as Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. And you're going to find more and more commercial companies coming into this for a demand. And that demand is now at about 57,000 satellites.
Wow.
Over the next 10 years to be put into orbit for different programs. So as that goes forward, what we have done is done a feasibility on the terrain and air, as well as what will be demanded upon to put satellites in polar as well as sun synchronous, and found that Michigan is well positioned to be the center point for that ecosystem. So as we build this out, what we're doing is reutilizing Michigan's, if you look at it, it's engineering, prototyping, tooling, it's manufacturing, as well as its base physically to be a leader in this LEO, low Earth orbit marketplace. As it grows, think of one technology that we're going to represent is the 5G connectivity for autonomous technology for automotive.
Yeah, we're going to want Huawei to get all that now, do we? So
I remember reading something somewhere last year, I think, about a proposal to actually build a launch center someplace on the northeast corner of the Lower Peninsula, somewhere on the Sunrise side, because rockets are launched toward the east to take advantage of the free extra velocity you get from the Earth's rotation. You know, you got to get to 17,000 miles an hour to hit orbit. And if you're on the equator, you get a free 1,000 miles per hour from the Earth's rotation. And if you're at the 45th parallel or thereabouts, you still get a free 750 miles an hour. So is that still being envisioned? Some kind of launch center on Lake Huron, up, you know, I don't know, Oscoda, Alpena, somewhere around in there?
Matt, thank you. It's our feasibility is including 3 segments. The horizontal launch site facility, the vertical, and a command and control center. So we announced in February the horizontal at the old Wordsmith Air Force Base there in Oscoda. And the FAA licensing is already starting for that. So we've started down the process for that. I'm going to be announcing the vertical site on Thursday to a national press. So that will be phase 2. We'll have both horizontal and vertical launch sites in Michigan. The third phase, which we'll also be announcing the ranking and where that will be in October for a command and control center. So if you look at the entire ecosystem for this, we will be able to provide not only the folks that are looking to put satellites up, but also to the industries of being able to have their technology in place by 2023.
Okay. So in terms of a launch center, I mean, space flight is hard, and occasionally things happen. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the launches are in Florida, because if something goes wrong, they just sort of dump it in the ocean and then see if they can fish it out afterwards. Is that another reason why it's being, eyed for that part of the state? Because you could abort into Lake, declare a safe zone and abort into Lake Huron if you had to.
It is, but I want to make a significant difference. We're going to be a green spaceport,
Okay.
meaning that we're actually going to be utilizing technology and fuel and propellants that are going to be considered green. So the kind of high toxic propellant and fuel that have been used in the past will not be part of our equation. So it's not only to bring leadership in the space industry to Michigan, we also understand that we have to be stewards of the air, land, and water in which we live. So we're actually bringing a whole different dynamic to the space industry than what they've been practicing for decades.
Let's talk about aerospace manufacturing / jobs here in Michigan. How big is that market right now? Do you have a handle on how many people are employed in that sector?
I will tell you the space industry is significantly limited, but our initiative, especially with our 5G to lead that drive from both production and launch from the vertical integrated marketplace, we'll be bringing 40,000 jobs to the state of Michigan by 2024. So think of this of opening 8 to 10 automotive manufacturing facilities and assembly sites. That's the impact it'll have on the state.
And then are you going to work closely with the automakers? Because obviously they want to have the connected car. I mean, the electric vehicles that are connected and all that jazz need 5G, right?
You are correct. I think what's happening, and I give this as a good example, I shared that with Elon. Jeff Bezos just bought Zook. You're seeing that they're building their own systems, but if the big three and the others don't start connecting their earliest entry point for this 5G connectivity to truly make their cars autonomous without getting into the space race for the satellite communication broadband, the experts are saying it will be between 2034 and 2038 that technology will be deployed at their current rate of trying to integrate with some system. We will be able to reduce that by 6 to 8 years, meaning that the electric vehicles that the big three are all counting on for their future growth and viability, through our initiative alone, will take 8 years off its speed to the marketplace, so that they'll be competing with the Teslas and the others in a marketplace much earlier than they have anticipated with the present technology.
So when you talk about vertical and horizontal launches, is that, explain to the viewers what you mean by that? I'm assuming that the vertical launch is a traditional rocket launch and the horizontal one is more like what Richard Branson is doing with Virgin, where they take a rocket up in a plane to get the first 50,000 feet of altitude and then launch it from there.
Matt, you described it perfectly. So you're absolutely right. Well,
Okay.
I'd like to say I can do a better job of that, but I can't. You did very well.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, wouldn't that be fun to have Richard Branson in the state, huh? So,
Well, he's part of our national team that we're putting together specifically for this vertical integration between space as well as automotive. And to your point earlier, Mike, what we're doing is looking at bringing the entire automotive and space community together at our conference in Traverse City at the Grand Traverse Resort, August 30th through September 2nd.
Yeah, we got about 3 minutes left, so why don't we talk a little bit about that?
We are bringing the experts, we're calling it the convergence of auto, space, and defense, so that what we're doing is looking and identifying and actually going to give a demonstration of a satellite driving a car around the Grand Traverse Resort, utilizing that technology. So what we're doing and being the leader of is saying Michigan's future is not only in what we're trying to provide through space, but the industries that will actually serve, and that one being actually automotive. So we firmly believe without it, we will be displaced as primes in the auto industry as far as providing vehicles. Everyone's going to this 5G technology connectivity, broadband. And an ancillary, but also equally important, is that we would be able to provide broadband technology across anywhere in Michigan for education, medicine, and first responders. So our program hits a lot of the demands that we're looking for, both socially as well as commercially.
Now, since we are in the age of pandemic, do you have a backup plan in case physically meeting in a lot of people in a small space doesn't work out too well, or what have you worked out there?
Well, already with the governor's guidelines as it stands today, we're able to put this conference together with the amount of people we're expecting. We're going to adhere to all of Michigan's coronavirus health doctrines and protocols, but this is a go. So we firmly believe, by practicing what the governor has asked us to, that the business of business will take place in person. But we will do so with respect to all of the health regimens in place.
And
All right, Kevin, if people want more information on the association, where do they go to get that?
I'm going to send you, it's called THENASS, THENASS.org. It's all about the conference, or you can go to our website, Michman, MICHMAN.org. But what you'll find there is a complete agenda and information, and the speakers will also be impressive, as these are the experts and actually identifying the 5G along with the automotive and how it goes forward.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Gavin
out,
Brown. Yeah, okay. Gavin Brown, Executive Director of the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for your time today, gentlemen.
All right, we'll be right back in just a minute with another segment of the M2TechCast. For right now, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And you're watching MITechNews.tv.
What do you get at Lawrence
Thanks,
Technological
Gavin.
University?
Thank you, Gavin. I look
Great labs and
forward
studios,
to
support
coming up to
professors,
Oscoda for a
hospital,
launch.
campus life,
Well,
NAIA
we'd love to
and
have
all
you
the
at
software
the
you need to succeed.
NAB
Be smart,
convention
be
as
more.
well.
At LTU,
Okay, all right.
possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
As a Lawrence Technological
Hey,
University
Brett.
graduate, you're not only marketable, you're worth more. Yes, more. According to payscale.com, when it comes to graduate salaries,
Dave was
LTU
asking
is
where you
America's
were. That's
top
why I was
100.
circling back.
Be
So.
invaluable. Be more. At LTU,
How's everything going?
possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
I've got two presentations.
All right, and here we go. You're going to give them now. So this is
Okay.
Mike Brennan.
And Matt Roush.
And we're in that segment of the show where we bring in Fred Brown, our epidemiologist, our man about town, bon vivant, infectious disease expert.
And well-known street fighter. That's
Yes,
right.
that too, yes. So, and Fred always has something interesting to tell us, not always good news, but certainly interesting news, something that we don't typically hear from other sources out there. So let's talk about one of the things you wanted to cover last week and we didn't have time was you said there was an epidemiologist report. Why don't you go into detail on that?
Yeah, I have some of the graphs. I'd be happy to show them to you. Basically, the New York Times is interested. What was done was the University of Michigan did a big survey, and they asked everybody, how long do you think it'll take until you're ready to resume normal activities safely? And this was a survey of 21 countries, 20,000 people around the world, Muslim countries, Christian countries, democratic countries, socialist countries, communist countries, open market, closed market, island states, in the middle of Europe. And what do you think the average respondent said?
Hard to say.
18 months would be my guess. 12 to 18 months.
So Canada was one of the 4 countries that came in at 18 months. That was the longest wait that anyone had. But on average, everyone said within 6 months, I think it's going to be safe out there.
Boy, that's optimistic.
Yeah. And so and what's interesting is that actually was kind of in 3 groups. About 25% of the group said it's probably going to take a long time. It's probably going to take more than 3 months and possibly never again. About 25% of the people said, I'm ready to do it today. About 25, and they were talking about probably about 30 different activities, maybe 50 different activities. About 25% of the people said, 1 to 3 weeks, within a month. And then the rest of them said, 25% said 1 to 3 months. So you had today immediately, 25%, 25% saying in about a month, 25% saying 1 to 3 months, and 25% saying, gosh, it's going to be longer than 6. So here's what the epidemiologist said. I thought it'd be interesting to say the epidemiologists were asked the same sort of questions. And now I was one of them that was a request. And there were some interesting comments. The first comment was they were disappointed in the timeframes. They said, what do you mean a month? The virus doesn't think in terms of months. It thinks in terms of, do we have a vaccine for this thing or not? Do we have a effective therapeutic or not? I'd rather answer the questions with regard to what the key milestone is rather than our artificial sense of time, which, as Einstein pointed out, was all relative anyway. So here's what the epidemiologist said. How long will it be before I'm willing to go back to go and look at sporting events, concert, and plays? And you can see that
1 year plus.
the result was pretty negative. They don't expect to go back to do much of any sporting events, concerts, and plays, which they consider, us epidemiologists are cautious types, and we consider a lot of these things as being, super nice, but not necessary for life. So 64% said, nah, doubtful. What's interesting is that over the summer, only 3% were with the rest of the participants, right? So the non-epidemiologists, 100% of them would say by fall. I'm sorry, 75% of them would say by fall, I'm ready to go. In this case, less than 3% was a comparative epidemiologist. So let's take a look at another one: hugs and handshakes. One of the comments was, real epidemiologists don't shake hands. Ever. And you can see, about half of them are saying probably not again. So sorry, no more shaking of hands to close the deal. But on the other hand, half of them are saying, "Oh, by next spring, I may be ready to think about shaking hands without, having myself embodied in armor, work and wearing gloves." Let's take a look at the next piece. Airplanes.
Well, one of the good things I will say, one of the good things this has done is pretty much eliminated the awkward hug.
That's right.
That's not a bad thing, really, because you don't know whether some people are really huggers and other people's aren't, and that's, you don't know what to do. So,
well, I'm from Switzerland, and in the French part of Switzerland, we actually kiss people on the cheek 4 times. That's greeting with friends. That has stopped. I can assure you.
The Dutch only do 3. I was visiting friends in Amsterdam, and I did the kiss, and they go, "No, one more." Go,
that's right.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
They thought you were mad at them. Okay.
Yeah, I guess,
That's the Parisian, sort of brush off business kiss. That's a double kiss. Yeah.
Well,
and the Russians are right on the lips.
What can we say about Parisians, right? They're always brushing people off. So.
So here's the airplane survey. Kind of 40% said it's going to be over a year, and that was basically over a year meant maybe never. So that was sort of the time frame offered. So 40% are saying we're not going to go on airplanes for a long time, and if we do, it's going to be with a lot of protective gear and probably some guarantees by the airline about how safe they keep their planes and how socially distanced they're able to maintain themselves. So that was the comments coming back on airplanes. This was done in June, and since then, of course, things have gotten worse. So presumably, epidemiology will even be less. Oh, I went backwards. Apologies. Here's stopping wearing masks. Everyone's wondering how long will it be before I stop wearing masks? And about 98% of the general public says, by fall, we're going to be done with this thing. Everything's wonderful.
Nope.
Certainly by Christmas. I'm moving insane if we're wearing Christmas. But you can see the epidemiologists are saying more than a year, absolutely. Only the Canadians came through saying 18 months. So that was that. Then we got on visiting the elderly, and this is the toughest one. I've got a mom who's going to turn 90 this year, and I see her outside, but I won't go inside. And my wife is the same way, outside but not inside. And you can see the epidemiologists generally are, it's a year plus before they're willing to see the elderly generally and their family members, about 40% rate. So there's been a big question that's coming up on social media. And a friend of mine is running, he went to high school with me, is running for congressional seat. And he was saying that there's evidence that suggests that actually these masks are causing CO2 to build up, carbon dioxide to build up and not getting through. So I wanted to, and it's sort of going through the community as this is why masks are dangerous, because there's a CO2 buildup and you can actually cause asphyxiation due to CO2 buildup. So I wanted to give you a sense of the size of a CO2 molecule versus the size of an average pore in a CO2 mask. And out of an N95 mask, which are you can get N98 masks, but these are about our most effective healthcare level masks. So here's the little dot on the left is your CO2, and that's 116 by 232 picometers in size. That's the little dot way over there on the left.
Okay.
And then the question is, does the hole that's in the middle of the slide prevent that from getting through? And you can see that that's 0.3 microns, and 5% of you can get a sense of the scale here. These are not molecular sieves that we're talking about when we're talking about putting on a mask. Generally, though, what people are saying is sometimes it's hard for me to breathe in a mask. And when that happens, the reason it's hard for you to breathe through the mask is because you're exerting yourself too much. The right answer to prevent spread of infection is not to remove the mask or to give yourself more air. It's to slow yourself down. And that's why in public places where you see the least amount of mask wearing is actually in gyms. Only about 41% of people who are in gyms are actually wearing masks because they just can't exert themselves that much and still get enough.
Yeah, I noticed they didn't ask the epidemiologists about the gym. I think that would have been a whole bunch of nevers, I would bet, till there's a vaccine anyway.
Yeah.
So how big is the average? My question would be, okay, so the hole in the mask is 0.3 microns.
Yeah.
How big is the average water droplet that might be carrying the virus that's coming out of my mouth right now?
Actually, it's a collection of, so it's the total size of the water droplet is, if they're droplets, or they're true droplets, are about 0.4 of a micron. So the droplet.
Okay, so this is just barely big enough to stop them then. That's probably what it's designed to do.
That's right. That's right. If it's a true droplet, now the size of the particles themselves without any moisture, which makes them unviable, they have to have some moisture to survive, is slightly smaller than that. But yeah, 0.4 in dry heat, and that's the size of a droplet. Aerosols get slightly smaller than that. So the aerosols can get through sometimes if it's not humid outside.
Okay.
So that's sort of the rule. So I thought that was sort of interesting about the difference between epidemiologists and what they're seeing with the data and the general public and what they're seeing with the data. And it's too bad because the epidemiologists do have a lot more data, and we're working with a lot more data every day than the average person sees. I wanted to show you one more quick thing, if you like, and that is there's sort of a debate going on right now about the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act was what the House of Representatives passed, and it has slightly over 3 billion,
Oh,
I said
trillion.
trillion with a T, trillion dollars available to continue funding the economy and to do certain things. And the Republicans have said, well, we think it's probably closer to about 1 trillion. And so there's going to be some compromises made. But one of the stakes in the ground that President Trump has put forth is he doesn't really want to spend $25 billion with a B on testing. He thinks that's superfluous. And actually, in this particular case, I'd like to present the case that it probably is a good idea to invest a little bit more in testing and tracing. And I don't know if can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So basically, the economics are pretty easy here. If you don't test and trace, that means you are, let me put this onto slideshow so you can see it better. If you don't test and trace, then you're really dependent on a therapeutic or a vaccine. Now, there have been a couple of very good new pieces of news about vaccines, which we'll get into it, after this discussion. They are coming in from both AstraZeneca and from Pfizer. And the good news is that we're seeing titer levels that are high enough to stop especially neutralizing titer levels in a vaccine that are high enough to stop the virus, we think, but only after a booster shot. Really, we need to have two shots about a month apart. And now finally we're saying that there's some T cell activity, which allows us to have a longer course of immunization. The issue with the antibodies was that now people were seeing that the antibodies were actually getting reduced by about a factor of 10 over about a 3-month period, normal antibodies. And so they were worried that the antibodies would disappear and there would be no memory about COVID. And when the next virus hit you, you get infected again. Luckily, T cells seem to be involved, which is very important. And they've just announced that today. So that's helpful. But we don't know whether this thing is safe for everybody. We don't know what the dosing levels yet are yet. We don't know who's going to win the war, whether it be China or the United States. There's a whole bunch of questions. So what we have today to work with really is testing and tracing. That's what our ability to control this virus depends on. Identifying the virus where it is and stopping the outbreaks early by separating and washing hands and wearing a mask. So that's all we have. And so if you look at testing and tracing, if we don't invest at least 25 billion, my worry is that we're not going to be able to control the virus in the short term. And my biggest worry is what happens in November and December. Right now, the virus is sort of playing with us, frankly. It's spiking here and there. But come November, December, when everyone goes back at home, we could have a real problem. We could have hundreds of thousands of people dying.
Then you combine that with the normal flu season. You'll have the normal flu and then the COVID flu, or whatever you want to call it, combined together. I mean, that sounds like a pretty interesting cocktail there, right?
It's really worrisome. And so I worry very much about the investment in our test and trace capabilities before November comes along. So here's my pitch to President Trump, and hopefully it's convincing to you guys. The first part of the pitch is COVID is sort of special. The way COVID and other coronaviruses move is they move asymptomatically. So you can see on this chart, 44% of the time, you get a symptomatic or environmental transmission. In the case of traditional kinds of outbreaks like we've had in the past, like polio or TB or typhus, it's slightly less than 10% is asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic transmission. What that means is that all you have to do is test people who are feeling sick, and you're going to get most of them under most disease states. The problem we've got with COVID is you can test everybody who's feeling sick and still miss over half of your population when you want to test. So if you're not testing randomly, in addition to people who are sick, then you're going to miss half of the infections, over half of the infections. And when you miss over half the infections with a transmission rate of 2.5, you go in logarithmic growth really fast once you get community spread starting, and we already have community spread in
Let me ask you a question, Fred. What are if because for instance, I have allergies, and in March I had a really bad allergy attack, and I didn't think much of it at the time because it's something that happens every year. other people I'm sure out there have the same sort of things. And then, of course, there's the regular flu. What differentiates COVID from, say, an allergy attack or from the normal flu? What are there different symptoms?
Oh, yeah, hugely. The biggest issue we've got is that COVID is not just a respiratory disease. We originally thought it was just a respiratory disease. It turns out that in about 10% of the cases, after about 8 to 10 days, this moves into your bloodstream. And when it moves into your bloodstream, the response of the body, the response is thrombosis, which means you've got huge number of clots all through your body and it kills you. So it's a very different kind of disease. And the other problem is that asthma is a come and go. I mean, it's there chronically, but it comes and it goes. Once you're over the disease, you can have permanent damage of your lungs, but over 50% of people who've had COVID are currently being treated for CNS disorder or central nervous system disorder, believe it or not. And we're seeing these symptoms continue past what we call resolution of the quote unquote disease in diabetics and hypertension and scarred lungs, in delusions in the central nervous system. So it's a very tricky disease. COVID is a much more tricky disease than asthma. Asthma kills a lot of, especially youth, when it's uncontrolled. But it's not nearly as deadly in its chronic stages as COVID is.
Now, the other thing that I've been hearing, and I don't know if it's true, is some people can also get some sort of brain damage from COVID. Is that right?
That's right. So we've got two different kinds of, I'm sorry, in the Midwest right now, we've got 3 different COVID strains. The original COVID strain actually affected both your nasal passages and your lungs at about the same rate. It was much less, it's about 4.5 times less infectious as the new European strains that have come in. And these new European strains actually are much more transmissible because they stay in your nose more than they stay in your lungs. If you think about it, it's harder to transmit the disease out of your lungs. You have got to really cough than if you're coming through your nose, which is closer to the surface, and transmission is easier. In addition, these new COVID molecules have 4.5 times more spikes, more different reactive surfaces on them that'll attack the ACE2 receptor site, which then infects you. And so that's why this new virus is so much more infectious, but it's also more deadly, and it has more symptoms. It's not necessarily more deadly. We're not sure exactly if it's more deadly, but it has more symptoms of the brain because it attacks your ophthalmic, the nasal bud. And it stays there, and it's because it's attacking that area more than your lungs. You actually have a much higher incidence of the virus entering your central nervous system through your nose, through your nasal passageways, and a sense of smell into your brain, which is very close, obviously, to your brain.
And I've also heard there are even some dermatological effects. This phenomenon I've heard of, COVID toes and sores on your hands and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's part of the. So the biggest thing that makes COVID different is this loss of sense of taste and loss of sense of smell. And we're using new detection systems that actually they're sort of interesting. In the past, right now what we're doing is we're measuring everyone's temperature when they enter a building, and you can count it with temperature sensor, and that is not. It's very sensitive because once you get over a certain temperature range, it goes off saying the person has a fever. The problem is it's not very specific. You can have a fever because of almost any disease type that you have a response to. The other thing is that it varies by your skin tone. So if you have a darker skin tone, you'll be measured at a higher level of temperature, which means you have to, the adjustments are kind of tricky. So you get a lot more false positives with this screening stage. We now have ways of looking at people's sense of smell. So you'll take a scratch and sniff, you'll smell it, and you'll ask what the smell is. And if you're correct, chances are, with about 80% kind of sensitivity here, 88% actually, then you don't have a COVID problem. But if you're one of the, if you do say, yes, I smell X, but it's really smell Y, then you're going to be screened out. You're going to say, oh, you could have COVID, go get a test. We're also looking at people's voices. because people's voices change, their larynx changes, their musculature change with COVID. Because and so MIT currently is looking at speaking and being able to hear on your telephone. If you think about it, you can use your hand phone and say, blah, 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 speak into a common sentence, and they can tell whether your voice is slightly elevated or lower in pitch. And by the pitch and the intonations of the words that you're saying, they can actually detect COVID pretty accurately, actually, today.
Wow.
So sort of interesting stuff starting to come out in the diagnostics, so that we're starting to get interesting diagnostics. The other thing about COVID, in addition to the transmission, is, and so here's what we're doing with viral testing, and here's what President Trump is arguing about. And he's saying, look, it costs a lot to do these tests, and we're getting some false positives. The issue is that if you look at how many we're diagnosing about 80,000 people a day. The problem is we have a positive rate of about 8.3%, which means we actually probably have about twice as many of the people at about 3 to 5% is what you'd expect to see in the population given the transmission. And in fact, we're at 8.2, so it means we're about twice as many are probably going around undiagnosed as diagnosed. So that means we've got 160,000 new cases a day that we can't, and we're only diagnosing half of them. The other problem is that it's taking us 5 days on average to turn around the test. If you go in for a test, you get your results back in 5 days. So you're walking around for 5 days potentially infecting people, not knowing it. If you're feeling sick, of course, you're going to stay in, but that's unacceptable. And in some places where we really need it most, like in Arizona and in Florida, these test turnaround times are getting to be 22 days long. By 22 days long, the average person dies in 24 days. So, if you're going to die, if you're on a death track, it's kind of 24 to 27 days. So, you're that's just way out of line. The other problem is, of course, we're repeating tests on a lot of people. So a lot of states are reporting their overall tests, but they're not saying, oh, by the way, Joe had 5 tests, right? Because he had the disease. He wanted to find out whether he's getting better. He had to do it for therapeutic purposes. All of a sudden, you're testing one person several times. So when they say we're doing right now our capacity right now is about 750,000 tests a day in the whole United States. I gave them 800,000. So I say if you can actually do 800,000 tests a day, then we actually need to do about 26.4 million if we want to get the turnaround time down to 1 and to be able to detect 160,000 people. And that costs that's going to cost you about $4.5 billion. If you are now, Quest and LabCorp, of course, charge you a lot more, but they're real costs. If you're the lab manager, for the reagent, for the tech, for the equipment, once it's bought, is about $5 a test. So that means we need about $5 billion for that level of testing to occur.
Well, it's a drop in the bucket when you're talking about a $3 trillion relief plan, or even a $1 trillion relief plan, right? So.
Yes. So that's why I'm hoping that President Trump says, okay, I'm good with $5 billion. But here's the other problem. The other problem with the whole thing is that not only are we having a lot of asymptomatic tests, but it spreads clumpily. It doesn't spread nice and smooth, right? It spreads so that one guy infects 75 people and the next 20 guys don't infect anybody. The problem, so if you miss that one guy who's infecting the 75 people, even if you test the other 24 and they all come up, positive, and you contact trace all those people, they haven't infected anybody. It's that one guy you got to find. And so if you're not really covered really closely with the contact tracing afterwards, you're going to miss a lot of your big vectors. Here's the typical spread. This is what Spanish flu does, about 40% of the infected. So every 4 people are going to infect 4 more people and so on. Here it's 1 in 10 for our COVID spread. Here it's 4 in 10. All of a sudden you can detect that pretty easily with a pretty loose connection of contact tracing. Here, for COVID, you need a really tight contact trace capability. And today, about 1/3 of the people who are actually finally reached by the contact tracers will refuse to answer any questions because they don't, they don't want to be bugged, and they feel it's an infringement on their privacy. And so we're already way below the level we need to in contact trace to be in the contact tracing area.
Well, there was a news story today about a couple someplace out west who was tested positive, and they were refusing to agree to stay home. So they actually had to have a police guard outside their house.
Oh, geez.
You know, I mean, that, yeah, it's a, you know, a lack of responsibility toward others, I guess, is it's somewhat ingrained in, you know, the American psyche is the rugged individualist, and it's really biting us this time.
It is. Well, part of it is, of course, you know, if you're someone who's out there and you're feeling pretty good and you're not, and you haven't been tested, right? Because we're only testing people who are feeling bad right now. We're rationing our tests. And you're feeling pretty good. You say, gosh, I still have to wear a mask. I still have to socially distance. I'm probably not even infected, you know? So it's sort of a big burden. If we were able to test more, people would be pretty sure about what their health status was, and then they could act appropriately. Right now, we're sort of saying, well, you know, trust us, even though you're feeling pretty good, there's a good chance you got the disease. That people are saying, come on, I you know, it's hot, it's uncomfortable. So we have to get testing more. Now, I just want to show you one last slide, and that's how long it takes. You wouldn't believe how intensive contact tracing is. It turns out that it takes 15 person days in order to track one new case in the United States today. So it takes a team of 15 people one day to contact trace everybody. The truth is, it's actually, our teams are teams of 5, so it's taking us about 3 days to contact trace after you get the positive diagnosis and you report it. So you're already kind of 5-6 days into it when you start the contact tracing, and then you got to go 2 generations back, right? Who did you contact, and then who did they contact? That's a lot of people, potentially, you know, between 20 and 50 on average, and we're only able to get between 6 to 10 responses generally with our 15 days per case. In China, they're able to turn around. They're able to do it about 3 times better than we are, and that's mostly because their people are more compliant. I think, and so they can get up. They can get tracing pretty good. So let's do if you do the math, and we're doing. We have about 170,000 new cases a day. Say some are known, some are unknown. It's going to cost us about. I calculated about $40 billion a year if we're as good as China at contact tracing. It'll cost us about 3 times that, or $120 billion a year to contact trace if people if it still takes 15 days per case. And then people have to be able to say, yes, I'm willing to respond. So here's what happens when you combine the 2 things together. This is done by University of Oxford, and it says, you know, percent of success in isolating cases. That's what your success rate is after you as an individual has tested positive. So you had your diagnostic test. So the bottom is your diagnostic test. That's the x-axis. And the y-axis is the percent success in quarantining contacts. That means you've done the contact tracing, and you're able to quarantine everybody who that person who's been diagnosed positive is within 3 day, 2 day, 1 day, an instant. So if it takes us 3 days, and right now it's taking us 5, but if it takes us 3 days, you can see that it's almost impossible to control the virus. No matter how good your tests are, you can be 100% effective in your diagnostic, 100% of the case of the contact tracing, and you're still just able to control it. As you get to 2 day turnarounds, there's a chance you can control it. What you really need to have is an instant test, and that's why people are talking about point of care testing. You don't want to have to send your test out to some central lab and wait for 3 days to get it back and then read it and then say, oh my gosh, I got the disease. I just infected half my family. You want to be able to say, you go to the doctor and you say right away, 5 seconds later, 5 minutes later, you're positive, go home and isolate. If we can get to that point, even better would be a home test. And there are a number of home tests that are being developed right now that go out on your phone. So your mobile phone, you have a home test. Every morning you get up, you do the test, and it either says yes or no, and you know right then and there, I'm infected or not infected every morning. If you can do that, then with contact tracing, even if you're only at 30% rate of contact tracing, you can control this. And it costs about $150 billion a year.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it at that, Fred. We've blown through the half an hour. I know it goes by very quickly.
It always happens that way.
Oh, it goes so fast. So in other words, right now, if you don't want to have to put all your eggs in the vaccine or therapeutics basket, you spend a little bit of money on the testing in the short term, and I think we can get ourselves past November, December this year. That's the good news.
All right, Fred Brown, you can find all of his various video interviews we've done with him, gosh, over the last, 3 months, I guess, and
Yeah.
fredbrown.com. And we also post them at mitechnews.com. But I'm afraid we're out of time for this segment. We'll get Fred back next week to scare us some more with whatever the latest scary news is, right?
There's good news coming, I promise.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, this is Mike Brennan.
And it's Matt Roush.
And you've been watching MI Tech News TV, and we look forward to having you join us again next week.
Monday at 2 p.m. We'll be here.